Okay.
All right, we are recording. Hi, Anna. Welcome to this public-private conversation. So here are a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. And the
Okay.
first one is, what's it like being a woman in the Liberating Structures community?
Huh, that's a funny way to start. That's interesting. Yeah. I don't actually think very much about that. I come out of social work, which is prominently made up of a workforce of women, and so, yeah. The first time I think I noticed actually my gender and anything related to like sex or sexism or power and gender in the Liberating Structures community was when we actually did the first European tour that I had done. And it wasn't because I had bad experiences. It was just because a lot of those groups had a lot of men in it. It wasn't even that there were necessarily more men than I was used to working with. It was just like, or more men than women. It was just like, I'm used to working with like all women and like Keith and Fisher. So like adding in this huge influx of men was like, wow, I'm not used to this. Like it is not typical for me to work. Yeah. And so, for me, I have noticed it isn't specific to Liberating Structures. It's more about being a consultant, but I do have a lot of women who are just getting started with their consulting practice, often reach out and want to connect and talk about their practice and how to get started. And men, I don't have as many men doing that. It's definitely more women who are wanting to connect and talk about that. And yeah, I think I do also realize increasingly that if there are some of us who are a little bit more like, we know more people in the network, or we have more of those cross connections in the network, it's just maybe a fewer number of women. And so I'm aware of that, and it feels important to increasingly create connections across particularly women and gender nonconforming folks in the network, because most of the practitioners I think are actually women. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't think about it though, Johannes, like that much. Is that weird? Should I be thinking about it?
No, it's not weird. It's just because you just mentioned it. The first time we invited Fisher and Keith for a workshop, afterwards we took a picture and then decided not to publish it because it was just too embarrassing, because we're just a bunch of white men. And that just made me pause. And what I'm kind of proud of is that now, especially the user group in Hamburg has developed into something where we often have maybe 60% women, and just it feels like there's a certain female quality to Liberating Structures sometimes. And often I now, because I work in software and that's very male dominated, and then now I get to work with groups inside the Liberating Structures community, and sometimes I'm the only man. And that's, to me, that's kind of refreshing. So.
Yeah, it's definitely like the Austin community, I think, because of my network and because of the folks that I know. I come out of mental health and community-based work. A lot of that's social work folks, and a lot of those folks are women, and facilitators are often women. And so, yeah, to me, it was very unusual going to Europe and then realizing like a lot of the network there is like an agile related network or scrum related network, and that's often going to have more men. I'm like, what is this? I do not understand what's going on. Like I felt it then, but it was good learning for me. It was super helpful for me to have that experience, actually.
You mentioned social work. What else is your background, and what are some of the things that influenced you maybe before Liberating Structures or while Liberating Structures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my master's degree is in social work, but I'm what we describe as macro practitioners. So micro or clinical practitioners are people that do therapy, and I have some of that training and experience, but I do more systems work. So I got started after grad school in mental health systems change in Texas, and so that's when I started using Liberating Structures. So I'm very, very influenced by people in the recovery movement, which is people who have lived mental health experience, who are changing the way that we think about mental health and changing the way that we think about the way that like culture and experience and you know, the way our minds work and the way that we interact really is shaped. And so I'm very, very influenced by that social justice movement. And I would say social justice movements in general. And then my undergrad's in social anthropology. We didn't even have social work in my undergrad institution, so I might have found it, but I was into traveling and I like thought that that was the way to do that. And so, yeah, but I was a very bad student in undergrad. So this is like formal, but you know, I grew up in the Central Valley in California, which is like very close to the mountain. It's between the mountains and the beach. So another sort of big set of influences on me is definitely like the wilderness actually, and being in wild places. And I think that's inherently quite humbling. Like if you don't do things in a way that's like deeply respectful or navigating with a sense of understanding about what's already there, like you'll actually not maybe survive that, or like not survive it very well. And I think, yeah, the mountains, like, you know, the architecture of a landscape, in particular the mountains, is like, for me, pretty important. I live in Texas now, which is like soft rolling hills and lushnesss. It's very, very different. But yeah, I'm from a little bit wooey, but also rural Northern California. So I think that's influencing me all the time too. Yeah.
Is there any way in which your own liberating structures practice differs from the way it is maybe written down or being taught or practiced, or other people practice it? And if so,
yeah,
what would be some of the significant ways?
So in my opinion, Keith and Henry, one of the great things that they did was they captured a snapshot of basically their practice of liberating structures in the book and in the website. And they did it with a huge amount of rigor and thoughtfulness and care. And then they also, in doing that, because they're people who develop their practices in community with other people, were capturing some of that collective sensibility. But I just don't, I mean, LS is just so not static. That's what's awesome about it. Like you have your own practice, and your sense of self and your use of self is expressed through that, your own practice, and so is mine. And so I think the more I work deeply with other people, the more I can recognize what's maybe a little bit distinct about my practice. You could probably describe what's more distinct about my practice than I can, though. Do you know what I mean? Like it's hard to describe what is just of you. But I think I have a little bit, I think Keith's way with language is so beautiful. I think he has some of the best use of language. Truly, I think it's just, I was thinking about it and looking through some of these old materials. I just think he's got such a way with words that's like really gorgeous. And I think, you know, and Fisher is like a collector of words. Fisher collects them, and he loves to play with words too. Whereas Henry, and I would say me to a certain extent, like we are more emphasizing minimalism and simplicity with language, and really want like something that feels maybe a little more conversational. And so it's very interesting to see what of my practice is more akin to Henry. And also I was like a manager, and Henry's a manager. Do you know what I mean? And Keith is more of like an artist in a certain way. And like some of my practice more resembles Keith because of that. And so I think a lot of my practice, the more I understand other people's practice, is reflective of me. So like my social work background, which is a multi-system thinking, you know, everywhere from the micro all the way down to the macro. I have a social justice lens. I think about power, think about how power plays across different contexts. But I'm also just like into humor and playfulness. I have like a pretty base sense of humor. Do you know, like I work with some of the smartest people ever. And I feel like one of the things that I can offer people is a really practical way of getting into using really clever tools. And so like I've made every mistake imaginable with all of the methods. And I feel like one of the things that I have to offer people is like the the hard-won wisdom of making all of those mistakes. So I'm both like, I think I'm quite experimental, but I'm also like, yeah, you know, if you run it this way, there are a set of things that might happen. And let me tell you about how that happened for me. I have all the horror stories, right? So like, I think there's just something like, I don't know. I think it's just my practice with LS is reflective of me. And I hope yours is reflective of you. And I hope that Keith and Henry's are deeply reflective of who they are as people. And I feel very, very comfortable like messing with the repertoire, messing with methods, because I've been practicing for 10 years with them. So I feel like try to be very, very respectful of the history and of all the people that have contributed to that history. And part of that respect is like messing with it. So, you know, but I think also, I guess the other thing I would say that makes my practice maybe a little bit different than other people's that I've only discovered through my learning partnership with Fisher. Fisher is very micro-focused. He starts with invitations. Like, again, that language piece. Keith and Fisher are both kind of really language-oriented, and I care about language, and I understand its effect on the way we experience things and think about things. But I'm also thinking a lot about us as a community and the flow of things over time and what we're entering with. And like this moment that we're in right now with COVID, I'm thinking a lot about our collective trauma and how we're holding collective trauma as we enter any session with any group of people. That's very social worky. You know, like that's a friggin' macro lens into a meso, like holding of a large design. And so I think probably that shows up in ways I don't even realize. Like that people are like, what is she talking about? Why do we need to think about that? And it's like, yeah, everybody's tired right now. Everybody's having intense dreams. Everybody's uncertain. So we have to inform our design with the cognitive load that we all have right now because we're in this world together. You know, we're making these transitions. And that feels real social worky, right? Like that's meso macro stuff. I'm not even thinking about invitations in that. All I'm thinking about in that is like how much, you know. Does that make sense, Johannes? Is that?
It's beautiful, especially the way you describe you kind of your lens that you're using, and I think the collective trauma aspect is something we often don't pay a lot of attention to, and just having that in there, I think that's really important. And so what's interesting is my next question would have been, because you already touched on this a bit, but do you have any favorite moments of failing? So moments when something went really wrong, but it was for some reason was beautiful. You learned so much from it, or any gems?
To show you what's happening. Keith and I had a really good early moment of failure that I thought was like very hilarious. So Keith, I learned with Keith, right? So like I was doing mental health work in Texas. My very good friend, Michelle Murphy-Smith, who was my colleague, introduced me to Keith because she had done HIV work with him in Texas. And so one of the very first times that Keith came to Texas and we did a session, we basically did a TRIZ with a bunch of people that work in inpatient and outpatient spaces, right? So they're working in community-based and hospital-based settings. And we just designed a TRIZ invitation without consulting any of the direct practitioners, you know what I mean? We didn't have an inclusive design process, essentially. And like, you know how it feels when like a TRIZ just fucking falls flat and like, you know, it did not resonate when like, I mean, they just like stared at us and it was like one of the best. It was like that sensation, like, you know, when a TRIZ lands, you just feel it. People are like they just get excited and amused and it was just such a perfect example. And I won't even bother to explain it to you. It was just the sensation of like flat. And that was like, that sensation, I will always, like, there's certain structures that you always have to design with people who are closest to the work or else your work isn't gonna like work at all. It isn't gonna fly. Your design is going to fail if you don't do it with others. And so that was probably the larger lesson with that. But I think like Keith and I still just like laugh because we think about, you know, and so I would say most of my, I fail so often, so frequently. I mean, I'm just constantly, we're always trying stuff and it doesn't work on some micro level. Like that's constantly what we're doing. And so I don't even notice anymore. I don't even know what the stories are. But I think some of the biggest lessons early on were related to, not having a group of people shape the design together. And then, were related to thinking that I could sort of mechanistically move through things. And I do think to a certain extent, you use liberating structures where you would use a traditional method and you're going to get better results than you would with a traditional, like a presentation or, an open discussion or go rodeo or something, for sure. But if you're not thoughtfully working with the group to thread the methods together and see how the output of one method moves into the next structure, if that's not clear, it's going to feel pretty transactional. And I think when I first got started, I was so focused on like figuring out how to like run the method that I missed the humans in the room and what their experience was. And I think that that's probably was an early set of sort of things that I really failed around. And then I just started to realize that my own anxiety was driving how I was tuning into the room. And I started to realize that if I stopped tuning into my own anxiety and needs for steps and mechanisms, I could tune into how folks were doing. And then I started to do this little brain trick where I just like forgot about myself and forgot about the steps of what I was trying to do and just checked in with people, and shockingly better results. Shocking. I know. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, don't you feel like you just fail all the time? I mean, it's constant. Like,
Yeah, and I spent some time thinking about it because I felt like I was unprofessional, but then I realized what benefit there is into taking myself and other people into that learning edge all the time. And I don't think I could do it any other way. Sometimes I get that desire for things just to go smoothly and me being all in control and pulling all the strings and people being just wowed. But ultimately, I think it's if you actually want to do something that serves the people in the room, then you cannot be in control all the time, or you have to let go to an extent that you feel insecure a lot.
yeah, that's like the inner state that tells you that you're maybe on the right track, right? Like you're kind of like, yeah, we had a moment, we were doing an immersion workshop this week with some folks. It was really folks from all over the world, as they are right now, because we're in virtual land. But I was really nervous about this. It's funny that Triz has come up twice around this, but I was really nervous that that we shouldn't have even done Triz. Like the collective emotionality was, a little too dark, or it wasn't going to be productive. And it was really nice. We checked in afterwards and just we're like, all right, y'all, was that just like, and everyone was like, no, it was like really connecting. And I think my nerves just sometimes get in the way of it's, people's, like I can get in the way because I want to protect, and I'm worried about power, and I'm worried about like not safety. That's not the word for it. It's more about connection and security, maybe, and enough security or stability in what's going on to connect across, right? And I'm just in this moment not sure about how much of that we're able to create and people are able to come in with, how quickly. And so this group very much was like, oh no, we're good. We're good. You just, we're fine. Like they produced it, even if the actual invitation was a little too much, or they sort of modified and adjusted and got what they needed in real time. And I just thought that was really kind of lovely. You can just get in your own way. Right.
Do you facilitate a lot of groups in conflict?
I mean, I think there's always some level of conflict in a group, right? Like So I think my perspective on conflict might be a little different than maybe some, sometimes other people have. My sense is that I always basically have a sense that there's a huge range of perspectives in the room. Mm-hmm. And like, sometimes people, their conflict, their way, or the dynamic in the group is that some people are very upfront and open about what's happening and the ways in which they view things differently. And then there are other times when there are undercurrents, and people may be not sure or not even aware that it might sort of need to be addressed at some point. So I guess my view is that in any one group, there is always some level, if they work together, there's always some level of conflict present. And so how do we work kind of productively together to sort of surface the wide range of perspectives? And then when we actually need to address it, then, how can we do that most productively, develop habits around that versus like, this is the one conflict and we need to deal with it versus like, we're always in a sea of like, there's tiny little, you know what I mean? It's just like a sea of conflict and like a sea of inharmony, which actually is what is helpful in groups. Like we need a level of conflict in groups that's really productive. But I think probably in your work, when you're needing to produce very particular kinds of things, I imagine there's very specific, tangible kinds of things that arise around that. But yeah, I do every once in a while, I'll have a group reach out to me because they need someone to help them navigate a particular dynamic. And it's often two people who have really different styles or they have really different needs from the group or the needs from the work that are coming head to head, and like folks need help around that. But I'm not like a specialist around that. I'm just somebody who happens to work a lot with groups and has a sense of like how we might move through that together. But yeah, I work with so yes, so much conflict.
I'm wondering, or I'm asking this because I wonder what a good result is for a group. Since I've been working with Liberating Structures, my whole understanding of what groups are working towards has really changed, because it feels like the traditional understanding is groups need to make one choice and everybody needs to be aligned, and that's a good result. And to me, that's not true anymore.
Yeah.
But especially for groups in conflict, I always wonder what's even possible, or what is it that we could hope for. And I just heard you talk about the surfacing the range of views, of perspectives in the room. I think connecting, even though we are still in conflict, is a good result. Is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think one of the things that is very social worky about my perspective is that like wherever we go, whatever group we're in, we are bringing our patterns with groups with us. So like, I think people come into any group dynamic or any one-on-one dynamic with truly different kinds of like needs. And I mean like real needs, like connecting in particular kinds of ways, or a low tolerance for a particular form of communication or pattern of communication. And like, I really strongly agree with what you're saying. If people can manage to connect across those differences as well and really make it possible to work with one another across that, I think that's incredibly powerful. And that means that really makes for long-term capacity to actually do good work together, right? And I think you develop that over time. It takes, working together and like having those sort of corrective patterns with one another. Like if you provoke me intentionally and I'm not used to that, and then I realize that it's kind of fun and I kind of like it, and I'm gonna like look to you to help me with stuff by doing that. Like what a cool way to learn a different way of interacting like productively with people. I think that's very sweet. But that's like, to me, what's lovely about groups. We like teach each other stuff about how to, be together. That's very cool.
Is there anything you're learning at the moment or something that puzzles you?
I'm having this like really sweet experience. So we're doing all of these virtual sessions with people, right? Like just so many. I'm just online all the time. And what I'm really enjoying right now is that people are signing up for tools and structures and quote unquote learning, which of course is real. It's not real that they're coming for learning. I don't know why I use quotes, but they're coming for like this thing, right? They're coming for a particular, but like we set up these black and white pages and we play music, and people might be getting more out of coloring together the in-between spaces of sessions. Do you know what I mean? And listening to music, and then also using like pen and paper and like turning their bodies away from their computers to write and like use their senses. And like I'm just so pleased with that, like the amount of like connection that's happening with that and delight. It is so sweet to me. I love it so much. And so my sense is that there's an emerging, for me, there's a little horizon that's emerging that's like, let's get on our phones, let's go on a walk in the neighborhood, let's like smell stuff. Let's like, you know what I mean? Like, can we not look at each other actually? Can we go do other stuff for a minute? Can we give ourselves for it? And I suspect we're gonna need to like Trojan horse that. Like, I think it's gonna have to be hidden inside. Like, we're gonna have to be like, let's try and do something in this particular way, and then we can experiment with other senses as we go. But yeah, it's the same thing that I'm feeling like this collective moment we're in requires a little bit of, we need to engage all the senses right now, and people don't always want to sign up for that directly. So it's the textural stuff that might be adding more value than anything we're doing overtly. It's like, here, listen to some chill music. Just have a moment to yourself. Great. Like that. So there's something in there that I think is like actually incredibly important and powerful and fun.
Sweet.
Yeah. Like, can we just give ourselves permission to do that? Can we just listen to bubble sounds underwater and like color on a freaking like ocean image? Great. Let's do that. I'm into that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. One more question, then a bonus question.
Mm-hmm.
Last one. What gives you hope at the moment?
Oh, so much. Like this is very, I think because we're talking right now at this time when everyone has been learning together, I'm really optimistic. Like, it's like, man, people are being so generous with each other right now and learning together in this way that is like really powerful to watch and see. And it is just the kinds of sweetness that we're seeing all the time are really powerful to me. I'm very hopeful. If we can keep doing that after things settle and stabilize, I'm going to be real excited. Can we please be this generous and kind and open all the time? Thank you. Yeah, I'm very hopeful.
Great. Bonus question. I just did one of these conversations with Henry, and I asked him about his steak tartare.
Yeah.
What's your signature dish? Or do you have anything that you really like to cook that you're famous for?
I don't really have a signature dish. So I live in Texas. People that I hang out with, I have a lot of vegetarian friends. I have a lot of meat eating friends. I have a lot of, I am the one person, I will say, that consistently brings the raw vegetables. So like, you know what I mean? Like, everyone makes these like immaculate, beautiful, like incredible dishes that are like, I have a friend who makes an incredible mole, and I have friends that are like, a really good friend of mine is vegan, and he's an incredible chef, and he makes so much stuff, but he mainly eats starch and sauces, rice and beautiful sauces, pasta and beautiful sauces. And so I will say, in my constant community, I think people at this point rely on me to bring the salad, which feels very boring. But I have since this is a bonus question, I'll tell you my secret, which is that I really rely on an eat to poop diet. So I want a lot of vegetables all the time. And I think if nobody else is going to bring that, I need to bring the raw vegetables. So I'm here for that. It looks different every time. There's no one way.
I think raw vegetables are really underrated, and there should be more of those.
I agree. Okay. I really agree.
Right.
I do like artichokes a lot, but like they're not signature. You just steam them and maybe, put them on the grill and they're freaking delicious. You don't have to do anything. It's not signature. It's just a good food. I also like lemon drops, which I do not make. All right.
So more to come in our next episode on cooking and cast iron, right?
I can't wait. I am so into you doing that. I really think this community of people has to be a bunch of really lovely cooks that care about details,
We're going to set that up. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
I'm sure we're going to do this again.
Yeah, this was very sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.